I never imagined that a single phone call could unravel my entire life. Yet, there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed, the ringtone still echoing in my ears, staring at a number I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion, disbelief, and the kind of anticipation that makes your chest ache. "Hello?" I whispered. A calm, unfamiliar voice responded. "Miss Lila Monroe? My name is Fabian Hartmann. I'm calling from an international law firm in Vienna. I have urgent matters regarding your late grandmother's estate." Grandmother? My grandmother had lived quietly in a coastal town I barely visited. She never talked much, never bragged about anything. I thought she had nothing beyond her modest seaside cottage. And now this stranger was claiming there was something I needed to know? I laughed bitterly. "You must have the wrong person." There was a pause. Then Fabian said, "No mistake. Your grandmother, Helena Monroe, left a series of holdings and assets that require your immediate attention. Please, I need you to come to Vienna. The details cannot be disclosed over the phone." I hung up and sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. My grandmother had been nothing like the women in magazines or movies, quiet, distant, almost invisible in her own home. She spent her days painting, reading, walking along the cliffs. I had grown up thinking she had a simple life. And now, the world she left behind was clearly anything but simple. I tried to push the thought away. For months, my life had been chaos enough. My boyfriend Jordan, who I thought loved me, had ended things abruptly. He claimed I was too ambitious, too focused on my own dreams. He said he couldn't keep up with me, yet every time I see him now, I realize the truth. He was scared of what I could become, scared that one day I would surpass him in ways he couldn't control. I hadn't cried. I didn't allow myself to. But sitting there, staring at my bedroom ceiling, the weight of everything pressed down like a storm. The funeral had been quiet. My grandmother had requested it. Just a few neighbors, a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years, and me. No one cried much. No one seemed to notice that she had been the backbone of our family in ways we didn't understand until now. That's when I remembered the little things she used to say, half in jest, half serious. "You're stronger than you think, Lila. One day you'll see why it matters." I had always laughed it off. What could she have meant? Strong enough to handle heartbreak, failure, disappointment. That didn't feel like a secret worth keeping. But Fabian's call made me reconsider. Perhaps her words were more literal than I imagined. The next morning, I packed a small bag, my mind racing. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not Jordan, who probably would have mocked the entire thing. I booked a flight to Vienna, a city I had never dreamed of visiting, carrying nothing but curiosity, confusion, and a growing sense that my grandmother had left me something beyond comprehension. On the plane, I stared out the window as clouds scudded past, thinking about how ordinary my life had seemed. I had worked for years as a graphic designer, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, believing my dreams were small and attainable. And now, suddenly, I felt invisible threads of a much larger world tugging at me. Threads I had no idea existed. Threads that would force me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about family, power, and myself. Landing in Vienna was like stepping into another life. The city was beautiful, with cobbled streets, old cathedrals, and cafes where the air smelled like pastries and coffee. But I didn't stop to look around. Fabian met me at the airport, impeccably dressed, calm, with an aura of authority that made me feel both intimidated and strangely safe. He led me to a law firm that seemed more like a corporate fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble, an entire wall covered with awards and certificates I couldn't begin to read. He handed me a folder, heavy in my hands. "Your grandmother spent her life quietly, yes. But she built an empire in secrecy. Investments, art collections, properties, some of which most of the world wouldn't even imagine," Fabian said. I laughed nervously. "She? My grandmother?" "Yes. She chose to remain invisible, to protect you from danger, to let you grow without interference. But now, Lila, it's your turn. Everything she built is yours." The words didn't sink in at first. I wanted to say something clever, something sarcastic, but I couldn't. My mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the tiny seaside cottage I knew with the empire Fabian was describing. And yet, deep down, I felt a spark. That same spark my grandmother had always seen in me, the one I had never understood. It was the moment I realized that invisibility, quietness, humility, could all be weapons in the right hands. I had arrived thinking I was powerless, that the world had overlooked me, that Jordan and everyone else had been right about my limitations. But for the first time in my life, I understood that nothing is as it seems, and the game had only just begun. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "They think I'm nothing, but they have no idea who I really am yet." Fabian led me through the firm, and I couldn't stop staring. Everything about this place screamed power, precision, and secrets I had never even imagined. The conference room where he finally sat me down had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Danube. Sunlight reflected off the water, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, on my grandmother, Helena, and the life she had lived in complete silence. He handed me another folder, thicker this time. Blueprints, contracts, digital accounts, legal documents, enough to make anyone's head spin. "Your grandmother started with nothing," Fabian said, "but she had a mind for strategy, risk, and opportunity that most people never even consider. Every asset, every investment, every collection you see here was carefully built over decades. And now it's yours." I laughed again, the sound hollow. "Why didn't she ever tell me? Why all this secrecy?" Fabian's expression softened. "She wanted to protect you. Wealth of this magnitude attracts attention, danger, people who would use you to get to it. She needed you to grow, to be ready, to understand the value of patience and strategy. She watched you, Lila. She knew you had the strength to handle this, but only if it came naturally, on your own terms." I sank into the chair, letting the weight of his words settle. All those nights I had spent thinking I was ordinary, struggling with bills, heartbreaks, and the disappointments of life. Maybe I had been preparing for this without even knowing it. I thought about Jordan. He had ended things because I was too ambitious. Yet here I was, standing on the threshold of an empire built by my grandmother. Funny how the people who claim you're nothing are always the first to underestimate what you're capable of. Fabian began explaining the structure of Helena's holdings. Art collections worth tens of millions, private companies in biotech, renewable energy projects, offshore investments, even a small chain of eco-resorts in the Mediterranean. Every venture meticulously documented, every risk calculated. Helena had created a world of influence that no one in my ordinary life had any idea existed. "And the thing is, Lila," Fabian said, leaning closer, "your grandmother was not just wealthy. She was powerful. In ways that don't scream for attention. Quiet, invisible power. That's how she survived and thrived for so long without drawing unnecessary eyes." I could feel a strange energy building inside me. It was a combination of awe, disbelief, and most importantly, possibility. I had spent so long believing I was small, irrelevant, powerless. But now I realized that invisibility could be a weapon. Quiet observation, patience, and strategic thinking. These were lessons my grandmother had been teaching me my whole life, without me knowing. The next days were a blur of meetings, document signings, and strategy sessions. Fabian introduced me to financial advisors, legal consultants, and even Helena's former personal secretary, Greta, a woman sharp enough to spot fraud before it happened. Every person, every meeting, every spreadsheet slowly began to reveal the scale of what I had inherited. Not just money, but knowledge, influence, and the tools to shape the world around me. And then there was the matter of Jordan. He thought he had ended things on his terms, walking away from me because I was too much. But I realized, the more I learned about Helena's empire, the more I understood the lesson she had subtly left me. The people who dismiss you, underestimate you, or betray you will always reveal themselves when the power shifts. I started small, making quiet decisions, observing the ripple effect of my choices, understanding how each piece of my grandmother's empire was connected. I wasn't ready to flaunt anything, not yet. The thrill wasn't in revenge, it was in strategy, in watching the invisible currents move beneath the surface. Fabian pulled me aside one afternoon. "You have a rare gift, Lila. You are capable of seeing patterns, risks, and opportunities that most people miss. Your grandmother recognized it. She built this empire with you in mind. Now, it's your turn. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I wasn't just inheriting money, I was inheriting a legacy, a way of thinking, a blueprint for influence. And for the first time, I felt the hunger, not for wealth, not for revenge, but for control over my own life, my own destiny. That night, in the quiet of the hotel room, I reviewed Helena's journals, handwritten notes on margins of company reports, sketches of potential ventures, personal reflections on trust and power. One line stood out, written in her precise, looping handwriting. Strength is not shown in fury, Lila. It is shown in silence, in patience, in understanding when to act and when to wait. The world underestimates the quiet. I realized then that my grandmother had been shaping me my entire life, preparing me to inherit not just her wealth, but her mindset. All the years I had felt weak, invisible, powerless, they had been training me for this moment. The next day, I received a message from Jordan. Typical, smug, and dismissive. He wanted to meet, to talk things over, probably to gauge how much I had changed, or to see if I had failed. I ignored it. I knew I wasn't ready to face him yet. Not until I had fully understood the power he never took seriously. As I looked out over the city from my hotel room, the lights of Vienna shimmering like scattered jewels, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. I was no longer the girl who had worried about rent, about heartbreak, about being invisible. I was Lila Monroe, the heir to an empire her grandmother had built in silence. And soon, the world that had dismissed me would have to notice. They thought I was nothing. They had no idea who I was about to become. I waited. Not impatiently, not nervously, just quietly, like my grandmother had taught me. The people who had underestimated me, dismissed me, betrayed me, they were about to see that nothing is more dangerous than someone who has learned patience. Jordan thought he could gauge me, manipulate me, or scare me. He had no idea that for weeks I had been quietly restructuring Helena's assets, consolidating control, and aligning key partners in her companies. Every move he had ever made against me, every doubt he had sown, was now irrelevant. The game had shifted entirely. The first meeting was with one of Helena's largest subsidiaries, a biotech firm that had struggled after her passing. The board expected chaos, a new owner who knew nothing, someone easily swayed. I walked in, calm, collected, dressed in a tailored black suit, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. They expected uncertainty. I exuded confidence. "Good morning," I said, voice steady. "I've reviewed every report, every projection, every contract. Let's discuss our next steps." The board members blinked. One even whispered to another, She actually knows what she's doing." That was the moment I realized my grandmother hadn't just left me wealth. She had left me authority. The kind of authority that doesn't need shouting or intimidation. It simply exists, quietly, and makes people pay attention. Over the next few days, I systematically reviewed each company, each investment. I didn't make impulsive changes. I observed, asked questions, tested loyalties. Every misstep by managers, every underperforming partner, I noted quietly. And when the moment was right, I acted. Deals were restructured, contracts rewritten, old debts leveraged strategically. And then came Jordan. He called, desperate, finally daring to ask for a meeting. "Lila, I just want to understand. How did you—" I didn't answer at first. I let him fumble. I let him feel the tension. And then I said, "You always underestimated me. You thought I was nothing. Now you're about to see what happens when you misjudge someone quietly powerful." He laughed nervously. It's not possible. You can't—" "I can," I interrupted, calm as a river before a storm. "Everything you built while you thought I was invisible, it's being reviewed, audited, and in some cases, absorbed into companies I now control. Your little startup? Consider it under new management. You won't be removed violently, but your authority ends today." He froze. That wasn't what he expected. No shouting, no humiliation, just the cold finality of strategy he had never learned. I let Fabian handle the legal finalizations. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to post anything online. The satisfaction came from quiet observation, watching the ripple effects of my actions spread through the networks Jordan had believed were untouchable. Within weeks, partnerships he relied on fell apart, investors withdrew, and his board questioned his leadership. Vanessa, the woman who had once seemed untouchable in her confidence, reached out too. She wanted clarity, or perhaps to reclaim what she thought she deserved. I didn't answer. People like her never understood that influence isn't about visibility. It's about control. And I controlled everything now. But my focus wasn't revenge. My grandmother had taught me something far more important. Power without purpose is empty. I channeled resources into causes she had cared about. Women's education, environmental initiatives, community programs. Every step I took strengthened my empire while honoring her legacy. One quiet evening, I returned to the coastal town where my grandmother had lived. I walked through the small cottage, now fully mine, and traced my fingers over the old paint-stained tables, the shelves of books, the tiny garden where she had grown roses. Everything felt familiar, yet charged with possibility. I knelt beside her grave, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and memories. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, "for everything, for teaching me patience, strategy, and strength, for showing me how to rise quietly." I realized then that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need applause or recognition. It simply exists, like the tide shaping the cliffs over centuries. Silent, inevitable, unstoppable. Jordan's messages stopped. Vanessa disappeared from the circles I monitored. Their world, built on underestimation, crumbled quietly around them. And I kept building, learning, and expanding. Never flashy, never boastful, just steady, methodical, and unstoppable. And in the end, I understood what my grandmother meant all those years ago. The world underestimates the quiet. I smiled. Because now, I was not just seen. I was feared in the way that mattered. Not for wealth alone, but for wisdom, patience, and power no one had dared imagine I could wield. They thought I was nothing. And in that belief, I had become everything.